Let me show you how I turned an old thrifted shirt into this. Hello, my name's Siobhan, and this is Studio Bonbon. Welcome back. In case you're new here, I am currently in the process of creating my own sustainable wardrobe from scratch, meaning I've been self-drafting and sewing my own clothes. Now, that term, sustainable wardrobe, means something different for everybody. But to me, what it means is using 100% natural fibers. And lately, I've been trying to source as much of my fabric as possible secondhand from the thrift store. And I've been really lucky to find some incredible finds. I have a whole collection of linens and silks just stacking up. So today's video is going to be a thrift flip. Yay! I am super excited about this. I'm always really excited to be doing a thrift flip, to be honest. So without further ado, let's get into it. So for today's project, I'm going to be starting off with this design. I had done this design quite a while ago, and one day I was looking through my fabric stash and I realized that I already had the fabric that I was going to need to make this kind of color blocked design. This is some leftover fabric that I had from these two shirts that I had made quite a while ago. And then one day in the thrift store, I found this really fantastic 100% linen men's shirt, which has got a ton of fabric, as you can see. So I thought that I had everything that I needed to get started on this project. However, in my last video, I did a color analysis on myself to see what colors look best on me, and I determined that I'm a cool winter, or maybe a cool summer. I'm kind of undetermined about that. But these colors are definitely not in my color palette. Especially this chartreuse green is way too warm for me because I have a cool undertone. And even this white is an off-white, but as a winter, I really need to have like a vibrant white. So here's my plan. I'm going to go ahead and redesign this design, and I'm going to try to dye these fabrics to get them closer to something that would look good on me. Now, I do already have some thrifted fabrics that are more in my color palette, but I kind of want to save these for other projects in the future, and I really want to reuse what I already have on hand. I picked up this 100% linen men's shirt. I actually got this in my Thrifting for Natural Fibers video, if you remember that one. This color is more in my color palette. As you can see, this is more of a crisp white, whereas this old one was more of an off-white. Don't worry, I'll save this and I'll do something with this in the future. The fabric is way too nice to not do anything with, but for this project, I'm gonna go with this one. So the next step here is going to be redesigning the shirt. But before we get into that, I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Craftsy. Craftsy is made for curious people who never want to stop learning. Their community welcomes anyone seeking creative inspiration and looking to learn new skills. Craftsy offers over 2,000 classes for creative people of all skill levels, from beginner all the way up to master. They have easy to follow step-by-step instructions in over 20 categories, including sewing, quilting, crocheting, knitting, baking, painting, drawing. If you're a creative person looking to pick up a new hobby, Craftsy's definitely gonna have something for you. As you might know, I've been on the journey to teach myself how to do pattern drafting. So I've been taking the class Pattern Alterations, Fixing Fit Issues with Ashley. In this class, she explains in detail how to adjust patterns for your unique body type. Drafting your own patterns can be quite overwhelming and intimidating in the beginning, and I really appreciate how clear and easy to follow these lessons are. Some other classes that I'm really interested in taking are Fine Dressmaking, Professional Construction and Finishing, Aran Crochet, and Crochet Toolkit, Designer Tips and Tricks. If any of that interests you, I have a link down below in the video description. The first 1,000 people to use that link are going to get a year-long premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. So definitely check it out if that sounds interesting to you. Thank you so much to Craftsy for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back into the project. Okay, so it's time to start redesigning this shirt. Just to give you a little insight into my design process, I like to think about the major points on the body and design in reference to those. So the width of my shoulders, my elbow, my waist, my natural waist, my bust line, and things like that. And I design around those markers when I'm drawing out my designs. And that helps a lot when I go to the drafting process, because then I can use those markers to figure out what the lengths need to be so that they fit properly on my body. So that's kind of my process. So the basic idea here is that I'm going for a cropped color blocked t-shirt. I want the neckline to be wide enough that I can take it on and off without needing a zipper or any buttons, similar to what I did with my purple embroidered shirt. I want it to have drop shoulders, and I want the sleeves to be quite loose fitting and go down to just above my elbow. The bodice itself, I'm hoping, is going to be loose fitting, and it's going to go just a little bit past my natural waist. With the bodice, I'm going to sew on a grid pattern in the same way that I did in my last thrift flip. So like I said before, the issue here is that I did a color analysis on myself. However, these two colors don't fit within that color palette. So the plan is to pick some colors from this and redesign this color blocking with something that's gonna look a little bit better on me. So let's try out a couple different color combos and see what we can come up with. Okay, so the first color combo that came to mind for me was using this sage green with like a purplish pink. That's not bad. I like that look a lot, actually. Maybe my intuition was right and the first one is gonna be the one. But let's keep going. Let's try a couple different color combos. Okay guys, sorry to spoil things for you, but this is the design that I ended up going with. I tried out a bunch of different color combos, but to be honest, it wasn't all that interesting to watch, and I really wanna move on to the more interesting parts of this project. Okay, so I think for all of these designs, my favorite is the sage and the warm purple. I think that was my first design and I'm still really gravitating towards it. I'm gonna turn this into a turquoisey, sagey green, and then I'm gonna try to get this to be this kind of plum pinkish purple. And then I think I'm going to experiment with the color of the thread that I'm gonna use for the grid, but I'm gonna wait to actually sew that up and do some tests on the actual fabric itself. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and get into it. The next step here is going to be drafting the top. All right, it is time to start drafting this shirt. The first step was to trace out my bodice block onto a fresh sheet of paper. I measured out on my own body the length that I wanted the top to be, and then I drew that measurement down the front center seam and squared it over to the side seam of the top. I measured the circumference of my head, which came out to be 22 inches. I divided that by 4 in order to draft in a neckline that would give me an opening wide enough to slip on and off over my head. I added on 1/2 inch, which would give me a total of 2 inches of ease. Next, I took a measurement from my shoulder to the spot that I wanted the drop shoulder to land. That turned out to be 3 inches, so I went over to my bodice and extended the shoulder seam by 3 inches, making sure to slope it gradually down so that it would fall nicely over my shoulders. Next, I extended the side seam by 1 inch at the armpit and at the bottom hem by 1.5 inches. This is going to loosen up the bodice and make it more roomy. As you can see, I also adjusted the armhole to make that curve a little less sharp. With the front bodice finished, I then traced out my sleeve block onto a new piece of paper. I adjusted the sleeve cap down by 3 inches to match the drop shoulder that I had drafted on the bodice. From the top of my shoulder, I measured out the length that I wanted the sleeves to be, and I added that measurement to my sleeve pattern. I made sure to mark out the front and the back of the sleeve because there's a slight difference in the sleeve block from the front to the back. In order for the sleeve and the bodice to fit together properly, the length of the armhole and the length of the sleeve cap have to match. So after taking both measurements, I went back to my sleeves and widened them until they matched the armhole on the bodice. Next, I traced out my back bodice block. The main task here was to make sure that all of the measurements from the front bodice matched onto the back. So the shoulder width, the neckline, the side seam length, and the hem length all had to match. And with that, the pattern was done. Next, it was time to test the pattern by sewing a mock-up. The fabric I used was this thrifted queen-size bed sheet made from 100% organic cotton, which at $4.99 was quite a steal. As soon as I laid it out on the floor to cut my pattern, I had a visitor. I don't add seam allowance to my pattern pieces, and that's because depending on the fabric that I'm using, the seam allowance is different. For instance, when I'm sewing with linen, I always do French seams, which means I need more seam allowance. But for this cotton mock-up, I only used a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, I sewed everything up in the usual way, nothing exciting there. And finally, it was time to try it on. Okay, so we have arrived at the moment of truth. I just finished sewing the mock-up, or toile, as one of you guys corrected me. And I'm gonna try it on now. I haven't tried this on yet, so I have no idea how this is gonna fit. So this is a first reveal here. Okay, so here it is. This is the mock-up, the toile. I'm still really new to drafting patterns and especially drafting sleeves. I've only really done it once before, but I really like the way that it came out. I think it fits really nicely over my shoulders, and it gives kind of the effect of it being draped over my shoulders. The neckline is quite nice. It's a little wide, so it might end up showing like my bra straps. I'm not really sure about that. I guess my option would be I could narrow it and then bring it down a little bit more so it's still wide enough for me to pull it on and off. I'm going to be finishing all of these edges with a bias tape facing, which I've never done before, but I wanted to hold off on doing that detail because I wanted to make sure that it fit first before I go into that, so I don't have a ton to have to rip later. The only thing is that like the back is a bit like loose, like the neckline is kind of gaping and it looks like there's some extra fabric in the back. Maybe it's not worth worrying about, but I do kind of wish that would fit a little bit better. The sleeves, I don't know why this happens, but like every time I make sleeves, there always ends up being like a lot of bunched fabric. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm not clipping the seam allowance or if it's an issue with my drafting. I don't know if you can see, but like under the armpit, for instance, there's just like a bunching of fabric that I don't think is supposed to be there. What I'm wondering right now is if these sleeves are loose enough. I want them to be nice and floppy like a t-shirt. And I'm wondering if I shouldn't try like curving the arm here just to make a nicer silhouette. I might actually add like an inch to these sleeves. I'm realizing now that I want them to kind of almost touch my elbow to have that kind of very loose, oversized t-shirt kind of feel. And this has got a 1/2 inch seam allowance on it, so they're going to be a bit shorter than this. So I might lengthen those just a little bit. I'm going to sit on this for a day and think about it, and I might adjust this a little bit before actually cutting this out of the linen. Gosh, guys, you know, it's so fun to draft your own clothes. One of the biggest reasons why I moved into making my own clothes is because I was just so frustrated going shopping and never being able to find what it was that I wanted. If I was able to find something that was like in the style that I wanted, it was usually in the wrong material or the wrong color, or it wasn't made well enough, etc., etc., etc. And it's so liberating to be able to just come up with your own idea of what you want and make it. Man, this is the way to go. I just think it's a wonderful form of self-expression. So yeah, I'm gonna sit on this for like a day and think about it a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and just sew this up in the final fabric. So, I just thought I'd take a moment to like talk a little bit about where I'm at with this project. Honestly, I'm feeling pretty frustrated with it, and I've been kind of neglecting it. I've been working on an animation project that's been taking up a lot of my time. I've been procrastinating on this project with that project, and I think it's because I finally hit the point in the learning curve where things are starting to get quite steep and I'm struggling to figure out what to do next. Because I'm not taking a class or anything, I'm just teaching myself how to do this based on like tutorials on YouTube and stuff. And so it's very much a trial and error kind of process, and I feel like I'm floundering around a little bit. I'm not really sure what is the next step to take. And rather than just like being calm and working through that and figuring it out, I've just been avoiding it entirely. But today I'm just gonna face it and we're gonna try to figure out what the heck is going on here. So I think the biggest issue for me right now is the sleeves. You can see that there's a bit of like bunching of fabric that's happening in the armpit, and there's kind of a tugging to the back. As you can see, like the seam is kind of pulling a little bit towards the back of the shirt. At the top here too, you can kind of see there was a little bit of like gaping of fabric in the back, and it's because there's more fabric on the back side of this than there is on the front. And this was definitely an error of mine I made while drafting this shirt. If we look at my drafted pattern here, like taking some time and walking away and coming back, I realized like just how little I understood what I was doing. But if we line up the bottom of the pattern here and the center seams on the back and the front pattern, you can see that at the neckline, there's about 1/2 inch of overlap. The front is narrower by about 1/2 inch. And I'm not sure what compelled me to do that, but I believe it's wrong. That neckline needs to match up on the front and the back. And then if we look at the sleeves here as well, they're not matching up either. Like I think what I was doing is I was matching this shoulder seam because the seams match when I match the shoulder seam together, but then the front center seam is not aligned. What it needs to be is the center seams need to be aligned and the bottom hem needs to be aligned. And then from there, I need to match those both up. So I'm going to adjust the shoulder seam and the neckline so that those match up. And we can see too that when I align the center seams again, the front is wider than the back by about 1/2 inch. I think that that's why the fabric is kind of pulling to the back at the side seam, is because there's less fabric in the back and so it's kind of pulling it. That could be part of why that underarm area isn't fitting quite right. So that's going to be the first adjustment that I'm going to make. Those are all bodice adjustments. But if we look at the sleeves themselves, I've pulled out this drop shoulder t-shirt that I have. I want this shirt to be a little bit closer to this. So if we look at the two, as we can see, the armhole on these is quite shallow as far as the curve goes. So I think I want to imitate that a little bit more. Really, like I think that armhole needs to be almost straight because it's not wrapping around my arm anymore. It's a drop shoulder sleeve. So I don't have to worry about it fitting under my armpit. It just needs to fit into the bodice. And so it can be more or less straight. And looking at my sleeve pattern here as well, there's quite a steep curve that's happening. It's creating like this kind of shape, but I think that it needs to slope down more. You know, when you put it together like this, it's kind of creating a lot of like extra fabric here in the armpit. And I think that's partially what this is. Like the sleeve is trying to stick out to the side, but because of the drop shoulder, it's not going to be doing that. It's going to be pointing down. And when it points down at the shoulder seam, that's resulting in a lot of extra fabric bunching at the armpit area. So I think if I trim off that extra fabric and make this slope a little bit steeper, that's going to help with that. That's what I'm hoping. So in summary, I'm going to try to deepen the armhole. I'm going to widen the sleeves to match that deepened armhole. And then I'm going to take the sleeve itself and I'm going to trim off some of that extra fabric so that it fits in a little bit more smoothly. Also, since I'm redoing the bodice, I'm going to deepen this neckline and then I'm also going to bring it in a little bit. Overall, it'll still have the same circumference, so it'll still be able to fit over my head, but I'm just going to change the shape a little bit. Oh, and then also I'm going to go ahead and add about 2 inches to these sleeves. After trying it on again, I realized that I wanted a little bit more length, and I think I'd rather have too much length than not enough length. So that's the plan. So let's go ahead and move into redrafting this, and I'm going to sew it up again, and let's see if that fixes any of the problems. Okay, here it is. Here is the finished mock-up with all of the adjustments made. And guys, I think I cracked it. I think this really is a lot closer to my original idea than the other one was. As you can see, I've lowered the neckline and narrowed it a little. I didn't add any seam allowance to the neckline. When I do mock-ups, I like to leave it at the final edge so that I can really see where that line falls on my body. So that's what I did with this one. There's no seam allowance on this, and I'm very satisfied satisfied with that. This is the length. I ironed up the edge for the seam allowance, so that's going to be the final length, and I'm really happy with that. For the sleeves, I feel like they're at a good length. They could be maybe like an inch shorter. I'm gonna leave it at the way it is for now. I can always shorten them, but I can't lengthen them. But overall, I think they've got that baggy t-shirt feel, which is exactly what I was looking for. And guys, look at the armpits. All those fixes that I made really worked. This is much closer to the shape that I was originally envisioning. As you can see, it's got kind of a loose t-shirt kind of feel, which is interesting because I didn't actually like widen the sleeves much at all. All I really did was deepen that armpit and kind of straighten the lines on both of those. And so they fit together a lot nicer now. There's no bulking of fabric. I'm super satisfied with it overall. I'm just super psyched to get into sewing it, sewing up the final. The next step is going to be dyeing it. And honestly, I just can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm really glad I pushed through and tried to make these adjustments because I'm so much happier with the way that it's fitting now. I'm feeling confident and strong. I'm really happy that I persevered through that kind of like moment of doubt. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into the next part. Okay, so I went ahead and experimented with a couple of different dyes here. These are the colors that I'm using here. It's RIT dye. I'm not sponsored by RIT. This was very discouraging at first. I really struggled to get close to what I was aiming for. I was trying to achieve these colors, but it proved to be a lot more difficult than I was anticipating. But I think I finally landed on something that I can work with. So I started with the chartreuse and I over dyed it with this royal blue. However, that just gave me shades of green that got progressively darker and weren't really moving in the direction that I needed them to be. As you can see, this is quite different. It's quite a different color. So I went out and I got some aquamarine and I tried that on the chartreuse, and that gave me these very, very bright green. It's kind of got a teal, kind of a hint of teal to it, but overall it's still really green. That wasn't really what I was going for either. I was really going for more of a bluish green, but I just couldn't get it with this chartreuse. The chartreuse is just so bold. This dye is really strong. It was really hard to, get that green undertone out of it. So I was feeling pretty discouraged at that point. I went ahead and moved on to the purple, and these are the results that I got. I took the pink and I just dipped it really quick into the purple. This dye is really dark, really fast, so I just dipped it in and pulled it out, and I got this shade. So yeah, I was looking at these colors and they're quite far off from my original design, and I just wasn't very happy. Like, I feel like these colors are kind of like clownish or something. They're just too bright. I don't know. Not blue enough. I really wanted it to be blue. And then something really weird happened. I took the pink and I dyed it with the aquamarine. And guys, this is what I got. Like a sky blue. I have no idea how this happened. I guess the dye in this pink just isn't very strong. Like this, there's no hint of pink left in this. It's still quite far off, but it's a lot closer to that sagey green that I was going for. So then I pulled out this sage dye, and I wasn't really sure if this was gonna work, but when I over dyed the pink with the sage, this is my result. Like, look at this. That's quite close to my original sagey green that I was going for. I feel like the purple could be a little bit pinker, but I'm pretty happy with that. And I feel like that's pretty close to my original design. I'm gonna roll with it. I'm gonna go ahead and move on and dye this fabric. Luckily, I have a lot of this pink linen, so there's going to be enough to do 2 sleeves. And we'll just forget about the chartreuse for now. I'll use that for another project. Let's go ahead and dye these and move on to sewing the final top. All right, so I am in the process now of cutting out my pattern pieces, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about my results from the dyeing. For the purple, I was able to achieve this really beautiful lavender shade. This is how it matches up with my color swatch. I ended up just dipping this into the bath for like seriously 2 seconds and pulling it out again. So it's just a very light wash of the purple. So if you're thinking about doing something similar to this at home, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, because getting the right shade for these, I had to focus on how much time the fabric was in the dye bath for. So this one was just dip in and dip out. Really delighted with the way that came out. Like, just look at how close that matches. And then for the sage green, the first time that I dyed it, I stuck this in the bath. I rotated it around with the spoon for like 1 or 2 seconds, and then I pulled it out. And at first I wasn't really quite happy with this. I thought it turned out a little bit too dark. I know I'm being like really particular about this, but I had extra fabric, so I thought I would give it another go. So I went ahead and I did it again. I cut out another swatch, and this one I just dunked in and pulled it out right away. This is how it matches up. It's a little bit lighter, but I think that this really complements the purple a lot more nicely. This one I also over dyed this with the aquamarine to make it just a little bit more bluish green, because I found that the sage was a little bit too gray. And because the purple lavender came out so colorful and bright, I really wanted to match it with the green. So I did a couple tests for the grid. I have 4 different types of thread here. I have like a bright turquoise, kind of a grayish green, a cool steely gray, and this light lavender purple. These are all left over from previous projects. And I tested out the grid with all of them to see which color would go best with these 2 sleeves. I actually really love the way that this bright turquoise turned out. It's very colorful. It's a very bright pop of color. However, I think that the grayish green is probably the best bet, because it really matches everything else. It looks really harmonious and intentional, and I think it looks a bit more professional than the bright turquoisey green. The lavender purple was just a little bit too light, and the gray I think was a little bit too dark. So I'm leaning towards this grayish greenish gray. I'm so psyched that this is coming together the way that I originally envisioned it. It's very exciting. I cut out some swatches as well for bias tape. I'm hoping to finish it with a bias facing, which I've never done before, but it should be pretty easy. And then what I'm wondering is if I shouldn't finish the collar with some colored bias tape. Something like that. That's gonna be a finishing detail anyways, so I think I can wait a little bit to make a decision on that. But yeah, I just wanted to give you some insight into kind of my design process here as I choose the colors for this window pane grid. Finally, it was time to sew up the final shirt. I cut out my front pattern piece from the back of the original linen shirt. I created the back pattern piece by first removing the front shirt pocket and then sewing the front 2 pieces of the shirt together with a flat felled seam. Then I took my back pattern piece and cut it out as one panel. Although this is the lighter sage green, I actually ended up sewing it with the darker one. Once all of my pattern pieces were cut out, I sewed the front and the back panel together at the shoulder seam using French seams. Using the center seams as a guide, I used my triangle to trace out the horizontal lines of the grid, spaced 2 inches apart. I set my stitch length to 1.5, and then using my gray-green thread, I sewed on the horizontal lines of the grid. Then in the exact same way, I marked out and sewed the vertical lines of the grid. Originally, the idea was to sew from one side to the other so that the pattern would match perfectly, but I kind of messed up on that. Next, I sewed the sleeve to the armhole using French seams. This is actually the inside of the shirt, if you can believe it. I love French seams, they're such a clean finish. Then I sewed it all closed by sewing across the sleeve and down the side seam in 1 stitch. Once again, I finished everything with French seams. Not only are French seams beautiful, but they also help prevent the linen from fraying, which hopefully means this garment will last many, many years into the future. I decided after all to finish the neckline with a contrasting bias tape. It was very thin, about 1/4 inch. Also, I completely forgot to mention this, but before I sewed anything, I finished every single piece with stay stitching around the edges. This way the linen wouldn't get misshapen as I worked with it, which can happen really easily with woven fabrics. And here is the final shirt. I finished the hems as well, of course, but I'm going to go into more detail in the final reveal. So, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, guys, I just finished the shirt and now it's time for the final reveal. I am so excited to share this with you guys. I think that this is my favorite make that I've made on this channel so far. Let me show you. Here it is. Here it is. I am so delighted with how this came out. I can't even believe it. You know, the interesting thing is that if I hadn't done that color analysis, I don't think I ever would have picked these colors for a piece of clothing. I just wouldn't have thought about it because they're not my favorite colors, but I love them so much. I love the pattern that I was able to land on. I think everything fits just so wonderfully. The grid came out quite nice. It doesn't match up perfectly across the whole garment. I kind of dropped the ball on that and didn't do the best job, but I think that's totally okay. It looks like a ready-made item that you would get in a shop. It doesn't have that like couture level of finishing detail, but it's okay. I love the contrasting detail of the bias binding neckline. However, I didn't do the best job sewing it into place. So I might rip that and redo it, but it's gonna be kind of complicated because the bias tape is so thin. So that's gonna be something for another day, but it's good enough for now. I finished the hem with a rolled hem. I wasn't really sure how the bias tape facing was gonna turn out on the sleeves, but it's so beautiful. And it adds a little bit of structure to the bottom of the sleeves. It kind of makes them rounded out, which I love. It just looks so professional and clean. So I kind of wish that I had done that on the bottom hem as well, but it's not a big deal at all. The seam in the back where I had to join the two fronts of the shirt together turned out to be quite a design detail. I did a very clean job getting the flat felled seam into place, so I think it at least looks professional. It's quite noticeable, but I kind of like it. I like to think that at some point in the future, maybe that it'd catch on as a trend for upcycled clothing. I've said this before, but there's something really nice about visible seams like that. It's an upcycled piece of clothing and it's not trying to hide that, you know? But from the front, you wouldn't be able to tell. I think it looks phenomenal. So yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say about this. I'm just so happy with it, and I think the whole process for this was really fun and rewarding. I'm probably going to make this design in a couple different colors as well because I just love the fit of this top. I think one of the best things about it is I just feel so like myself in it. I feel like these colors really complement me really well, not just as far as like seasonal color analysis goes, but also my personality. I feel like it's so me. That's honestly the best part about making your own clothes, is getting to define your style with every project, and I really feel like this is my style. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope that process was interesting. I don't really know how much my audience actually enjoys watching the process of. Sometimes I worry that it gets a little bit boring watching the making of process. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Like, what's your favorite part of these projects? What would you like me to spend more time on? What would you like me to spend less time on? I'm all ears. I'd love to hear from you guys. I've gained quite a few followers now and a few fans, it seems. And so I'd love to hear from you guys what you think and what you'd like to see more of. I know I said in my last video that I'd be back the following week with more projects, but life kind of got ahead of me. My computer completely got fried. I ended up getting a secondhand rebuilt computer. I had to build that kind of from the ground up. I joined an animation project that's been taking up a lot of my time, and so life has been really busy, but new videos are coming soon. Definitely, I have a long list of projects that I can't wait to dig into. It's so creatively fulfilling for me to be able to be here on YouTube and share it with you guys, with like-minded people who enjoy doing these kinds of projects and watching other people do these kinds of projects. So thank you so much for being here, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.